Hi there. In this video, I'm going to compare the Ultimate Hacking Keyboard version 2 with the Dygma Raise, and I'm also going to compare them with the Nocfree Lite. These keyboards are all nice and split, and these are also keyboards that have this row stagger like a normal keyboard would. If you're watching this video, you're probably watching it because you're considering buying one of these. You're probably also thinking that it's going to be nice to have a more ergonomic layout without having to worry about your fingers not being able to find the keys. Personally, I've taken the deep dive and I now prefer to type on columnar keyboards, and I think it's safe to say that they are slightly more ergonomic. But it could very well be the case that you're interested in keeping things simple and familiar by sticking to this row staggered layout, in which case the goal of this video is to mainly point out the differences between these keyboards. I cannot tell you which keyboard to buy, that is going to be up to you, but what I can do is point out some subtle differences between these keyboards that might help you make the right decision. So let's talk about the first thing that's different, which is the way you plug these keyboards in. This is the Nocfree Lite, and the way that you connect the two halves is you have this USB cable, basically, USB mini, I should say, that connects both halves, which is great, and then you use a USB-C cable to connect the left half. That's the way that you can connect it. From there you can split this keyboard as much as you like, but you cannot connect the right half. As you can imagine, this will have an influence on how you might be able to place this keyboard, but this is fundamentally different from the Dygma Raise. The Dygma Raise comes with this thing called a neuron, which is where all your settings are stored in, and the way it's working is you gotta plug the main USB into that, and from there you can plug into both halves. One thing that you'll notice is that both halves can actually act independently. I could choose, for example, to only use the right half, remove this bit, and maybe do something with a mouse on this side. Alternatively, if you are, let's say, someone who has a lot of good stuff going on the right hand and you have the left hand for something else, maybe you're a lefty, you use your mouse here, then you can actually use both halves independently. And that's also a thing that makes this keyboard somewhat unique. And the Ultimate Hacking Keyboard also does an extra thing there. If you want to plug in the Ultimate Hacking Keyboard, there's typically an extra step you gotta do, which is you gotta turn this one around, and then there's this one groove at the bottom over there, and that's where the USB-C cable can go in. And then there's kind of this section at the back that will hide the input cable. And this is kind of in an attempt to keep things looking clean, but that also comes with a consequence. First of all, it's the right half where you're gonna plug everything in. And second of all, if you're the kind of person that likes to move around a lot with your keyboard, that also means that it's just slightly more annoying to plug and unplug this thing. If I now wanted to unplug this, I would have to turn it around again and pull the cable out. And in doing so, you are going to be pressing a lot of buttons accidentally. It also deserves to be said that for the Ultimate Hacking Keyboard, there is no carrying case, or at least there's none that you can buy on the website. The Ultimate Hacking Keyboard is also a fair bit heavier than the other two boards. So it could be interpreted as this is a keyboard that is meant to stay put. You're going to keep this on your main desktop, and from there you're going to end up using it. If you're going to be doing a lot of traveling, just be aware of this. It is a heavy board. It's not the easiest thing to take around. This board does come with expansion modules though. So I can click this in, and then my thumb has an extra couple of buttons that I can press on this side. And on the side over here, I can add these other modules that don't give me extra buttons, but you do get this trackpad that does allow you to move the mouse around. This costs extra money, but I will say, having this trackpad here does make this keyboard very unique. The mouse support on this device is pretty much excellent, and I might even argue that without this expansion module, you can move your mouse around by just pressing a couple of these keys, and you can also accelerate and decelerate the mouse movement with a button, and the firmware on this thing is somewhat custom, and it has the best support for mouse movement. It wouldn't work for gaming, but for most app things that you're going to do as a developer, you can actually automate your mouse on this keyboard, and that's a really great feeling. The Dygma Raise, in theory, also comes with some mouse movement that you can do. I will say though, the mouse movement on this thing is pretty finicky. You can do the big movements quite well, get the mouse from this side of the screen to that one, but if you're going to be trying to get the mouse just right over that little button that needs to be pressed, and if the button is small, like the little X icon on a window, let's say, that is super tricky with this keyboard. I've not gotten that to work in a very satisfiable or nice way. On the other hand, the Nocfree, It comes with file, and the mouse support there is pretty darn decent. When you buy the Dygma Rays, you are going to get a very decent carrying case. And for the Nocfree, for I think $10 extra, I don't know for sure, but it wasn't a whole lot, you get this carry case, which is more of a pouch, but it gets the job done. One benefit that you might experience if you're going to be using the Nocfree is that you do actually have dedicated arrow keys on the side over here. Now, I personally don't need an arrow cluster, but I can imagine that a lot of people might. It can take a while to get used to maybe having a layer and having your arrow keys there. Having dedicated arrow keys can be a reason to consider this one. If I take the right half, though, of the Dygma Rays, I could argue that the Shift, Alt, Function, and Control buttons over here could also be configured to be an arrow cluster. That is totally something you can actually do, and if you look at my review video, you're going to see a configuration that does just that. That is something that the Ultimate Hacking Keyboard won't do. The size of the keycaps simply do not allow for that. So if you are a dedicated arrow cluster kind of a person, do keep that in mind. If you're interested in doing some tenting with your keyboard, know that the Nocfree does have this little flap that allows for some light tenting. The Ultimate Hacking Keyboard in its base version comes with little legs that can also offer slight tenting support. But if you need anything more than that, be aware that you can buy extra module, which is not necessarily cheap, for the Ultimate Hacking Keyboard to allow it to do extreme tenting, and the same holds for the Dygma Rays. The Dygma Rays in its base form doesn't come with any tenting whatsoever, but you can buy the version with the tenting legs. Now, a big part of having a smart keyboard is the fact that it's programmatic, and I gotta say the programmatic features of all these keyboards are, in the end, pretty comparable. It depends on what you want to do. There are some advanced things you might not be able to do, though. The main things that you're gonna want to do, things like home row modifications and things like timing on the buttons, those are all things that you can totally configure on all of these boards, but there are some subtle changes. The Nocfree gives you File, which is a QMK-based configurator, and you can also configure some combo keys with that, which I think is a nice feature. The Ultimate Hacking Keyboard kind of comes with its own programming language that you can configure quite nicely. And although the Dygma Rays doesn't have the most advanced features, you do get pretty good support for macros, and I think it's also safe to say that if you're a very visual person, the GUI is pretty intuitive too. If I were to describe the keyboards in their own little ways, I would say that this keyboard, the Ultimate Hacking Keyboard, is amazing at automating your mouse. That's definitely its unique feeling that I get from it. For the Dygma Rays, it's the fact that you get these extra buttons for your thumb. In theory, you're going to get 4 buttons per thumb. In practice, I felt that it's more like 2, but it's still nice to have 2 easy-to-reach buttons. That's definitely nice. And then finally, the main thing with the Nocfree is I guess that it's definitely the most affordable option out of all of these. But one thing you might also want to remember is that in the base form, it actually does wireless as well. I'm not the biggest fan of wireless. I don't like the idea of a battery that can run out, but you can actually get this in wireless mode as well. It is my impression that you can buy the Rays new, I think, with Bluetooth, but you are going to pay some extra money for that. So the Nocfree, I would say, is basically your go-to for something that's just cheap and affordable, but still has some very decent settings out of the box. Now, I do want to make it clear up front that I'm probably not going to be using any of these keyboards myself personally going forward, and that's mainly because I tend to like these boards more these days. I still have some RSI issues in my wrist, and I found that even if I configure this board just right to minimize my wrist move, there's always going to be a little bit of wrist movement, simply because of the fact that these buttons aren't in straight alignment. There's always a little bit of this you gotta do to find the right button, and something about that just makes my right wrist hurt. That is why for the foreseeable future, I see myself using boards like this. And if you yourself have serious wrist issues, you might want to consider a board like this that has a proper keywell. As far as typing comfort goes, stuff like this really is the state of the art. But if you don't have serious RSI issues, then I do think boards like this can offer something useful in the sense that they do open up your shoulders because you can split them. And these boards are definitely nice and programmatic. Whenever I use these boards, I configure them in such a way such that I never have to reach the faraway keys. Things like backspace get moved to caps lock and stuff like that. So there you have it. These are the main differences. I hope they're useful in your purchasing decision. Do remember that the perfect keyboard does not exist, but in the meantime, there are some keyboards that could be worth your time.